Thank you very much for the introduction. It's really great to be here. It's great to be here. It's probably great to be wherever everybody is. Um, it's exciting. I was scheduled to talk in person, and I've spoken to Nature Guelph in the past about the buried creeks in Guelph, and uh, and I've always enjoyed those events. And anyway, I'm really happy to be here and combine both the 2Rivers Festival and Nature Guelph. So I'm going to share a bunch of slides and pictures and stories from the trip that I've been doing with my family and some friends, starting in Guelph and heading downstream. And I've been really kind of using this trip as an opportunity to learn as much as I can about the landscape, about the history, about the water, about the waterways, about the quality of the water, and about the relationships between people and the environment, about my relationships with my family, and about the boats that I'm using, and a whole bunch of things. So I've really been using this as a jumping off point to have for a lot of learning and to kind of gather stories. And so the concept I'm kind of working with is that I'm sort of paddling down these rivers and I'm gathering stories. I'm going to share some of those stories with you tonight. There's a lot more stories than we have time to share, but I'm just going to give you a kind of a little summary of a few of them along the way. So I'll dive in and see you on the other end. And there'll be some time at the other end for questions and that sort of thing as well. So so stick around, and if you have any questions, then we can have some Q&A at the end. I'm not quite sure how that'll work, but we'll give it a try. So this picture is us leaving Guelph, and I just wanted to give a little, just let you know sort of who some of the people on the trip are. This is 4 of us leaving Guelph, my wife in the orange vest, and my 2 sons in the blue canoe behind, and some of our crew. So this is the, I'm trying to just move there we go. I can't see all this screen. So this is my mother and father on the right, with my son Nigel in between them. My parents have been great support crew. My mom actually sewed the spray skirts that we use on our canoes. They've been doing all kinds of shuttles. My red-haired son Kofi in the middle, my wife Leslie, and I'm on the left. This is my friend Uli. Without Uli's help, I wouldn't have been able to actually fix up my canoes, and Uli also sent me a care package of materials to fix some boats along the way, from Old World Woodworking. You may know him. This is our friend Rory, who came from Japan 2 years to join us 2 of the 3 years that we've been paddling. This is my brother-in-law Frank. He's paddled with us all 3 years. This is my brother Jason. Oh, no, that's not him. This is my brother Jason. He's also come with us for all 3 years and joined us on the trip. So just a little bit about the route. Here we are in Guelph here. We've basically trying to sort of plan where we're going to go. The red route is our probable route. The green has been some possible options. But the route we've been looking at is the Speed River down to the Grand River to Lake Erie to the Niagara River, the Niagara River to the Erie Canal, Erie Canal across to Lake Ontario, across to the Oswego Canal, down the Oswego Canal to Oswego on Lake Ontario, along the eastern coast of Lake Ontario to Wolfe Island, just near Kingston, and then downstream from there. There's a question mark at the end. I really don't know what the stopping point's going to be. It really depends on how well our little boats do in the big river. Once you get past Quebec City, you can see the river opens up quite a lot and gets really wide. One possibility would be go down to Riviere de Loup and then kind of portage up into the headwaters of the St. John River and then take it down to St. John and the Bay of Fundy. That's a possibility. Another possibility is just to hug the coast as far as we can make it. And I'm not sure, like I said, I don't know where that will end up being. All depends on how the boats do in the tides and the wind and the waves of the big river. So a friend of mine had an old canoe that was rotting into the ground. I rescued it, and at Uli's shop, I steamed a bunch of wood, steam bent it over this form, pulled the boat apart largely, put in new stems, new planking, new gunnels, innels and gunnels, recanvassed it. I've got a bit of a love affair for old cedar canvas boats. Recanvassed it, and also then kind of rigged it for sail. So this is that same boat 6 months later in the water. So I'll just start with the Speed River, and we'll kind of start the Speed River and work our way down. Okay. So I'm going to go back here for 1 second. So the Grand River is also in Haudenosaunee, I think in Mohawk. One of the words is Usgoa, also known as Tinatua. That's a new name that I just learned of this week. Interesting that actually the word Oos is the name that that the Grand River is known of at the Six Nations. And interesting kind of linguistic thing here is that Ouse is actually a river in England that Simcoe, when he came over here, named the river, and somehow that name has actually has now become the Haudenosaunee term for the Grand River. One of the I also got this other Peshinaguning is the name that I was told from some folks at Mississaugas of the Credit. Just a little point here is that all the waterways, Great Lakes, all have indigenous names. These are Ojibwe names of the Great Lakes found in an interesting atlas online. So if you Google indigenous or Ojibwe names of the Great Lakes, you'll come across this map. I couldn't find a name for the Speed River. I couldn't find a Haudenosaunee name. I couldn't find a Ojibwe name, Anishinaabe Mowin name, Huron name, anything. But if anybody knows of one, please let me know. I'd love to know the name. That's a kind of a quest, is actually find the name of the Speed River. So this is the Speed River here, leaving Guelph. If anybody's paddled out of Guelph, you'll recognize these weirs. Hopefully these weirs will be removed at some point. This is the Hanlon Expressway, and we left in the summer, and you can see the level of the river. It's pretty low, it's pretty bony, and we actually walked a fair bit of it. We called it Speed to Sea, but it was often walked to the sea. Just below Guelph, the river is very beautiful. Once you pass the wastewater treatment plant, the river opens up into some really lovely stretches before you get to Hespeler, and it's beautiful down there. I don't think too many people know about it. Tons of places to camp along the river. So this was camping between Guelph and Hespeler. Lots of places to camp. So if anybody wants to go down the river, there's lots of places to camp all the way down the Speed and the Grand. Once you get into Hespeler and kind of the greater Cambridge area, you start to hit the dams. And there's a whole series there. I think something like there's about 10 major dams in the Grand River watershed, but there's all sorts of small weirs and smaller dams all through the system. So this is one in Hespeler, and you can see the building on the left is an old mill. So every place there was falling water or dropping water. Many places on the Speed and the Grand River, communities formed to take advantage of that water power, and they built mills for and communities sort of sprung up around the dams and the mills. And so this is one in Hespeler. One of the challenges with the dams is as you come up, you really notice the deterioration of the water quality. So the mills slow the water down. The dams slow the water down. They create large kind of pools of ponded water where sediment collects, and there's a smell. You can see the water actually. You can just feel it. It just gets kind of, the quality just drops and it starts to smell, and the vegetation changes. Everything kind of changes. You start to see lots of kind of floating matter and algae and that sort of thing. So so the question about water quality kind of comes up all the time as you're paddling, because you see the water and you're so close to it. One of the things in the Grand River watershed, one of the bigger challenges that we have to the water, to the quality of the water, are the wastewater treatment plants. So we've really urbanized, and a lot of people have moved into the Grand River watershed, and we have a whole series of water treatment plants across the watershed. And this is the case all across the Great Lakes, where wastewater is sort of a major contributor to nutrient loading of the rivers and ultimately of the Great Lakes. On the GRCA website, you can see some reports on the quality of the water in different parts of the watershed. And you can see here, there are, orange, yellow, a few red, a little bit of green. So the green is actually up towards Guelph and the Erie River and the Speed River, upstream of the Guelph Lake, and also the Grand River up by Luther Marsh, and for those people from Damascus up by you guys. If you notice, there are no spots that are blue. This is all based on on nutrient levels, but there are no blue spots in the Grand. However, if you look at previous years' reporting, you'll find more red dots and more orange dots. So the water quality in the Grand Basin is getting better over time. It's still not good. Sometimes it's good, and some places it's good. It depends not only where you are in the watershed, but also seasonally. But it is getting better over time. And just another little thing to point out is there are 5 surface water, drinking water intakes across the watershed. So we have one just on the Erie River upstream of Guelph. There's one in Kitchener. There's Brantford, Six Nations, and then Dunnville down draws water at Lake Erie. So heading back down from Hespeler. So this portage was pretty decent actually, and it was fairly easy to make. But this is that weir that we saw from the other side a minute ago. These weirs, one thing that they do is they actually aerate the water, so you get a lot more oxygen in the water downstream of the weirs, which you would have done also if the weir wasn't there. There would also be falling water, which would be like riffles and that sort of thing, which would add oxygen to the water. That's a 401 from the Speed River. So probably you all know the 401. Well, that's what it looks like from the water. And that's what the 401 looks like from underneath. So when we were paddling through here, it was a hot summer day. And just to the left of us, you can't see them in this picture, but there were a couple of guys sitting in lawn chairs drinking beer. It was like a beautiful summer day, and they're sitting in the shade with their feet in the water, and a couple of lawn chairs and a couple of bottles of beer. I'm hoping they took the bottles with them, but it seemed like a nice spot to have a drink on a hot day. We didn't see a whole lot of people using the river, like on the water, in the water, paddling, swimming. But the main users of the water are people fishing. So the most people we kind of interacted with or saw, like the actual humans, other than people driving cars over bridges, were people fishing. And saw lots of people fishing on all the waterways that we were. Here's another person fishing. This one's actually down near Brantford. The bridges basically create opportunities for people to get to the water. So the majority of the use along the water of kind of random people, as opposed to people who have houses or whatever, are right at the bridges. So the bridges are where people come to fish, people come to kind of hang out, people come to put graffiti on the abutments. So there are lots of budding artists who use the bridges as a hangout spot. It's also where you find most of the garbage, because a lot of people leave their garbage when they come down. But the bridges are not only the places over the river, but they're the access to the river most of the time. Public access to the river, because there's usually a public right-of-way right at the river, whereas many places the shorelines of the rivers and lakes are in private ownership, but these little spots are public access. This is where the Speed meets the Grand. It's quite a nice spot. There's some islands out here. So one nice little trip from Guelph is to go down. I've done this a couple of times. Paddle down, camp out on these islands. Like leave on a Friday, camp out on the islands on a Friday night, and then you can make it into the Cambridge market for coffee on Saturday morning. Just so you have a sense of where we are. Here's the 401 here. This is the Speed River coming in, and this is the Grand River coming in from Kitchener. So here's the confluence, and you can see Preston here, and the Rare site, if you know Rare, it's down here. So now we're joining the Grand. So the Grand, we joined the Grand part way down, and then took it all the way down from there down to Lake Erie. This is coming into Preston. Another dam. Another dam portage. This is in downtown, right in downtown Preston. We parked underneath that bridge over there, and then went up and had coffee in the community. It's pretty nice. This is heading up to Mill Creek. So the Mill Creek comes into the Grand River in Cambridge, and so we did a little exploration up to Mill Creek. Anybody who I mentioned earlier, I've got interest in buried streams, and this is one that I want to explore more. But the Mill Creek, for people who are from the area, the Aberfoyle Mill on Old Highway 6, Gordon Street South. This river flows from there, quite a long ways, through Shades Mill at the GRCA headquarters, and then out into the river here. I'd love to actually take a boat up there and, drag a boat up in the dark and maybe paddle it down on when you get some high water. I think it'd be pretty fun. All along the river, you see these remnants of the kind of industrial, economic history of the river and people's use of the river. So these are kind of well-known abutments that are down between Cambridge and Paris. And you see these kinds of things all along the river, all along the Grand River, but then also, along the other rivers. Like you see them in Niagara River, you see them in the Erie Canal and the lakes. This is heading into Paris. So Paris is at the confluence of the Grand and the Nith rivers. So the Nith River comes in just behind Paris. You can see there's some bluffs over there, and just behind is where the Nith River comes in, and there's a long portage, or not a long portage, but there's a portage in Paris, a really nicely laid out portage, much better than the portages in Cambridge, Preston, and Hespeler. So when we were paddling through Preston, Paris, there was a guy walking the side of the river, and stopped and said, "Hey, we're looking for a place to camp." It was getting dark, and he said, "I said, looking for a flat place," and he goes, "Oh, I know a flat place." And so he took us up to this, which turned out to actually be the Optimist Park in Paris. And we started out kind of being a bit nervous camping in parks, just thinking, so if the police come or if some neighbor calls, then they're going to boot us out. Somebody will come by and then they'll tell us we're not allowed to stay. So this was one of our first park camping experiences, and there's a baseball diamond right over here, and that night a bunch of kids were over here kind of drinking at the baseball diamond, and they broke into somebody had left the storage shed open, and the kids went in there and they stole all the bases from the storage shed. Don't know why they stole the bases, but they did. We met this young woman in the park walking her snake. This was some kind of a python named Linguini, and she was socializing her snake. She was taking it out to socialize the snake, because I guess it was an antisocial snake. I don't know how social snakes ultimately become, but this one, I have high hopes that it's now a happy member of the family. This is heading down from Paris towards Brantford, and we met somebody on this stretch of water paddling towards us. There was a couple in a canoe, and as they're paddling towards us, the guy in the stern was paddling and the woman in the front wasn't paddling, and they came close to us and they asked us if we knew of where there was a nurse's station or some kind of emergency services, and we didn't know. And turns out that he had cast a hook and had lodged it in her thumb, and so they were just paddling to try and find a place to get it removed. This is another weir. This is in Brantford. These are the two boats that we use most of the time. So this blue cedar strip is quite big and has a lot of space. And this is the white one that you saw me earlier on fixing. Brantford, of the communities along the Grand River, I'd say Brantford has a pretty difficult. They don't have a very good relationship with the waterfront. So this is a whole section of Brantford that is all hardened shore. So I really think that Brantford, I just took one picture. I could show you a bunch of pictures, and the water, the river front going through Brantford is pretty rough shaped, like right from one end to the other. And I'd say that Brantford maybe has the best opportunity to repair their relationship with the river of any of the cities and towns along the river. Just a little bit downstream of there, we found the shopping cart graveyard. Once you get downstream of Brantford, the river you hit the clay plains, and the river gets deep and much slower, you start to lose the kind of riffles and little rapids. The bends in the river moves much more slowly, like the bends in the river are wider and slower. And this is paddling through that section. We did a late night paddle. I called the Chiefswood Park at the Six Nations while it was still light, and I said, "Look, we're heading down from Brantford. We're going to be there late." And they said, "Just come in and camp, and we'll figure things out in the morning." So we paddled through the night. It was beautiful, and this was just as the sun was going down. And then this is Chiefswood Park. They have a canoe sign. Chiefswood Park is right on the Grand River at the Six Nations, the Chiefswood Road. So when we were there, a friend of mine, Carolyn King, who's from Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and former chief of the First Nation, is now working on a project called the Moccasin Identifier Project. And she came to visit us, and I'll share a little story here. This is her.
So one of the things about the Moccasin Identifier is that it will help people understand our connection to the land and to the water. And I start my talks and I say, we as First Nations people, if we do not get a marker on the ground today, we will be lost forever. So this marker system will allow us to, in a nice way, let people know our connections to the water and the land. And in history, and the record will tell you that all of our lifestyle was literally tied to the waterways. So as we go through this province, and as your project goes down the Grand River, they can see the Moccasin as it floats down there. I'm very honored to be on it.
Thanks, Carolyn. So Carolyn stenciled on an Ojibwe moccasin onto the bow of our canoe. And so an interesting thing, so Carolyn has partnered with the Bata Shoe Museum, and they found they have a collection of old moccasins. And the story, as Carolyn tells me, is that First Nations people used to be able to identify each other by the type of moccasin that they had. So by looking at each other's feet, they could tell by the way the moccasin was put together, the form of that moccasin people could tell what tribe they were from, what community or what region they were from. And Ojibwe, the word Ojibwe actually means puckered stitch, and it actually shows the stitching of the based on the stitching of the moccasin. So Carolyn, I'm hoping I was going to get her. She was going to come to Guelph this spring. And I was going to put a call out to anybody who had canoes, and with the idea that she would come down and talk about the Moccasin Identifier Project and stencil people's canoes. So it's not happening this spring. It might happen this fall. It might happen next spring. But if people are interested on this call, they want to actually get one of these stencils from the Moccasin Identifier Project on your canoe, send me an email, and I'll put you on a list. And then when that happens, I can let you know. And we'll probably do it downtown in the Baker Street parking lot in front of my office. So Carolyn mentioned that First Nations people were tied to the water, and this is a map from an archaeologist I know named Martin Cooper, and this is a map of Attawandaron community locations. So these are probably pre-contact community locations, and you can see them along the lower Grand River, and then the upper Grand River. And this is or up the Grand River. This is basically across the river from where the Six Nations are now, close to Brantford, some in Milton, along Lake Ontario, and then near the mouth of the Niagara River, and along the Niagara River downstream of the falls. So I just thought this is interesting to see where like these are basically known archaeological sites that people have researched, and these are from the Attawandaron people who are no longer, my understanding is the Attawandaron people are no longer in existence. They may have descendants, or there may be people who have Attawandaron ancestry, but the Attawandaron themselves are gone. In terms of territories and Indigenous people and First Nations people in this part of the world, Southern Ontario, and along the Grand River, this is the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. And then the other blotches are the purple and different colors here with the straight lines are different treaties. But Guelph, as well as much of the Grand River, if not all the Grand River, I don't think the whole Grand River watershed, but all the Grand River itself falls within the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. It also, this is the Haldeman Tract. So this is the tract that was given to the Six Nations after the American War of Independence or the American Revolution, depending on which side of the war you were on. That's the Haldeman Tract, 6 miles either side of the Grand from headwaters to the mouth. Well, I told you how bridges were kind of the access points to the river. Well, we saw a few people swimming, not very many, but the only people we did see swimming were kids. Anyway, these kids, they had a rope ladder. They had a long rope hanging underneath this train trestle, and they would basically climb up and leap off these things. Like some of the kids were leaping off this level, others climbed up here, and others swung on this rope swing and leapt off into the water. So this is just by Caledonia. Beautiful, beautiful bridge, multi-span bow bridge in Caledonia. We saw tons of beautiful bridges. The bridges from all different eras, and this is one of the really fabulous ones we saw. One of the really coolest ones on the Grand River too. There's another dam here where I'm taking a picture from above the dam, and this is another mill at a dam location. So this would have also been fed by the drop in water created by the dam power. So there was also at one time there was this idea of putting in a series of locks throughout the Grand River, and several locks were actually constructed in the Grand River to make it a navigable river. Carolyn had mentioned that people use the waterways to get around, but I really think that the Grand River wasn't a very navigable river for much of the year. It would have been difficult to navigate in the winter. At times, probably it was great as long as it was cold enough. But the summer, it gets pretty shallow. The river is probably lower now than it was historically because so much of the headwaters have been cleared, and so the rate at which water runs off into the river has really increased. So you probably get the water probably is shallower now than it was historically. But even so, I don't think that people would have really used the Grand and the Speed Rivers very often as navigable routes. I think probably they use trails more. That's my guess anyway. And I know that there are a whole series of historic trails through the area. This is also sort of harkens back to some of the early industrial activity, industrialists who built some pretty amazing houses and properties along the way. And this one is also down by Caledonia, downstream of Caledonia. This is the dam at Dunnville. You can see sailboats here. So this is the last dam on the system. So these boats actually have access out to Lake Erie. And the dam in Dunnville was actually created to put water into a canal called a feeder canal, which fed the first of the two Welland Canals. So Welland Canal was there sort of two Welland Canals. The first version of the Welland Canal was fed by water from the Grand River instead of Lake Erie as well. It was to supplement water from Lake Erie. The bottom stretch of the Grand River are really quite beautiful. They're wide, they're wild. You can see the wind turbines as you get close to the lake, and the wind speeds increase. It's the same stretch. And then this is pulling into Port Maitland. So Port Maitland is the biggest port on the Ontario side of Lake Erie. So it was, I'm sure has been used since time immemorial as a safe haven on the north shore of Lake Erie. And it's currently a working port, industrial port. It was used by warships also in the War of 1812. That's us sailing into port. You can see the size and types of boats that are still using the port. And then that's Lake Erie out there through the past the breakwalls. Okay, so now we'll go here, Lake Erie down to the Niagara River. So Lake Erie is basically an inland sea. All the Great Lakes, they're huge. They're basically inland seas. You can see the size of the water. They're so big, you know, you can see the cloud, a storm coming here. Now, LaSalle in the 1600s noticed that LaSalle built the first sailing ship on upstream of the Niagara Falls, the first European sailing vessel upstream of Niagara Falls in the late 1600s, and that ship disappeared on its first trip. And Lake Erie has been known as a real very difficult for sailors because it's the shallowest of the Great Lakes. The waves come up quickly, so there's a long fetch. The wind comes from a long distance. When you get a small wind here, so small wind here, kind of at the northeast end of the lake, it often means that there are bigger waves coming, and that was definitely the experience that we had. We definitely found ourselves in some challenging spots out on this lake at a couple of times, and if I was paddling this lake again, I would do it a lot differently. And if anybody's going to paddle the lake, I have some suggestions for you, some safety suggestions, which I learned the hard way. This is a lighthouse, and the story goes that lighthouse keeper here would there's a pond on that little island, and the lighthouse keeper would shoot ducks out of the top of the lighthouse for dinner. Here we are going towards the Welland Canal, and this is a tall ship that sails out of the Welland Canal. I think it's like on a kind of daily basis. It's like a kind of a tourist ship you can get a ride on. At the mouth of the Welland Canal, we were looking for a place to camp, and so we actually found this break wall, and it was quite an awesome spot. There was nobody out there. We had it all to ourselves. It was flat. The ground's a little bit hard, but it was beautiful, and we got to sort of sit out here on this break wall, you know, have our meals. Like we're basically carrying stuff with us as if we are not going to get to a town or be able to resupply. So it's as if we're doing a sort of a backcountry trip, where we're kind of doing these trips the same way. We're taking everything we need with us, all of our camping supplies, all of our cooking supplies, you know, first aid, whatever we need to have, we're basically self-contained. So this is sunset off from that break wall, and this is the top end of the Welland Canal. Again, same break wall. I'll just go back here for a second. The Welland Canal was basically completed in 1830, about 1830. The first canal, and then it was expanded and widened. And so when we were here, this is where you can actually see. We actually watched large, like, ocean going and Great Lakes going vessels, coming in and going and leaving the canal. It was pretty cool to see these massive ships pass us right through this channel here. Here we have the two canoes that you saw earlier, both rigged for sale currently, and another canoe because we had a couple of other people joining us, and we rigged up a GoPro on a kite, and so this is a picture from the GoPro on a kite. It's sort of like low tech drone photography on Lake Erie. Here we're paddling right at the very east end of the lake, and that's Buffalo in the background. Again, there's Buffalo, and this is taken from Fort Erie. This is what Fort Erie used to look like. It doesn't look like this anymore. I don't think there are nearly as many geese, and there aren't nearly as many people shooting at the geese in Fort Erie. But you can see the fort. The fort in Lake Erie at Fort Erie was was a key point of conflict during the War of 1812, and it changed hands back and forth a couple of times. It was used by the British to blockade in American ships in the Niagara River. It was taken over by the Americans. It was a base for the Americans, and it was taken back. It was blown up. It was quite an interesting. A lot happened in Fort Erie. As we paddled, sort of just from Fort Erie, just into the mouth of the Niagara River, we stopped here. We came across this weird structure in the water, and it was the end of the day. It's getting dark, so we're looking for a place to camp. We pulled in right here. There's some people fishing out on the corner here, and we pulled in here. It was kind of a mucky, smelly beach, and we pulled in here. Again, we're kind of a little bit worried about being kind of run out, camping here and kind of being too visible, and having some bylaw officer come by in the middle of the night. So we camped here. We talked to the people who were fishing, and they said no, this is a terrible place to camp because several reasons. One is there was a big spill, and all the contamination is washed up on the beach. There's a guy. The police are hunting for somebody just down the coast who has a gun, and there are foxes. So the last thing, having foxes at the beach as a reason not to camp kind of clued us in that maybe they just didn't want us to camp at their fishing spot. But so we checked it out. We talked to some people. There was no contamination. We don't know if the story about the police chasing somebody with a gun was true or not. But we ended up camping right in these bushes. And it was this weird place. We just had no sense of like what what this whole structure was. And if you look at it, you can see these things in the water, and you can see this kind of funny structure over here, and this kind of funny sort of break wall. Anyway, it's as we stayed there, we learned that it was an old place called the Erie Beach, and it was a $2 million playground. It was a huge sort of park amusement ground set up in what's now kind of Crystal Beach. So Crystal Beach is still a recreation sort of destination, but it was set up right across the river and across the lake from Buffalo. So Buffalo at the time was a very wealthy, well-to-do American city. It was was a very rich American city at one point, and this amusement park was set up to bring people from Buffalo as a big sort of amusement destination. And you can see here, there's this long pier, and the boats that were coming across, basically dropping people off. And they had over here, they had a racetrack, they had a zoo, they had a casino, they had, in here was an outdoor, like a swimming pool area. And another swimming pool over here. They had some kind of a weird structure. They had outdoor dance floor. They had, big bands. It was like a real happening place that collapsed with the Great Depression. So the Great Depression, basically, people stopped coming, and this place fell apart. And this is what it is now. So it's still all these kind of weird structures on the side of the water. This is the base of that weird pinnacle-y thing. This is the pier that I showed you earlier, where they would bring the boats across from Buffalo. And I actually met a guy on the beach there who asked his wife to marry him on the end of that pier. That's Buffalo by night. So we walked out to the edge, and we could see across to Buffalo. It's quite beautiful at night. This is the top of the Niagara River. So this is the Peace Bridge. We actually portaged with the help of a few people. We kind of portaged this start of the Niagara River. The river really kind of cooked through here, and we didn't have any backup in the river. Like, we didn't have anybody kind of spotting us downstream, and so we kind of bypassed this. So my cousin brought out some lunch to us, which was awesome. We met some people from Quebec, and they had roof racks in their car, and I asked them, and they put our canoes on their car and shuttled them down. So we just kind of basically portaged this with the help of a few people, and then struck off into the Niagara River. So our speed basically doubled in the Niagara River. So we're typically paddling about 5 kilometers an hour. In the Niagara River, we go 10. So everybody wonders, the Niagara River, what happens if you tip in the Niagara River? What about the falls? Well, that's what they look like from the canoe. It does send a bit of it gets your heart beating, I would say. It's you can't hear them. This flat line, there's actually a dam structure across here, so you can't actually hear the falls, but you can see the mist, and you know what's there. So just upstream of the falls, there's a place called the Chippewa River. It's actually a river the direction has been reversed. And so we paddled into there. And this is where we stopped. In our first year, we stopped just right there above Niagara Falls. Here we are. So we just did that for fun. We didn't actually portage the falls, but I thought, you know, if we're getting to Niagara Falls, people had kept asking me, what are you going to do when you get to the falls? And I said, well, we're definitely going to portage them. You know, that doesn't make sense. I go, what else are we going to do? We're going to portage the falls. But I find it fascinating that, you know, as I was portaging the falls, basically nobody paid any attention. You can see all these people, like I just walked through the falls here or past the falls with the canoe on my shoulders, and nobody paid any attention except for this person here. There's a woman here with a camera who saw me, and she stopped and turned around. However, we found out afterwards that actually people were paying attention, and that there was a call that had been put out on the police radio that there's a guy with a canoe headed for the falls. So as we were going through this little stretch here, we got a little video footage, and then the police descended upon us. We had all of these officers in training, and then squad car, some other people come, and everybody was talking on their radios, and they're talking to us, and it was mayhem for about 15 minutes until they realized that we were just having fun, and we told them the story, and then they posed for a photo with us. So I'm going to tell you a few different stories about Niagara Falls, because there's lots of things here that I think are really interesting. So the Niagara Falls this red here is the Niagara Escarpment going from Michigan, Lake Michigan, around through Manitoulin Island, down the Bruce Peninsula, down past, you know, Milton, places that we've seen it, past Hamilton, and then the Niagara Falls, right? Niagara Falls are upstream of the escarpment, and the escarpment goes all the way through northern New York State, almost to Rochester. So that's the escarpment, and I'm just going to show you this other image, which is kind of cool. So here's the escarpment running east-west, and the falls are way back here. So basically what's happened is the amount of the water has eroded the escarpment back from here all the way back to its current location. So its current location is, I don't know, I'm not sure I'm not sure what that distance is, but it's like several kilometers back from the escarpment, and it's basically eroded its way back. In 1678, there's one of the early European explorers made a mark where the falls were. So this is where the falls were in 1678, and you can see that they've eroded back almost like about 800 kilometers since 1678 to their current location. And this is on the Canadian side. The American falls have also moved back, but not as far. But they've also moved back significantly. So the falls, you know, they are eroding their way back up the Niagara River towards Lake Erie, but the rate of erosion has drastically decreased. So now the water is managed on the Niagara River. A lot of the water is diverted both to power projects, both on the New York side and on the Ontario side. And so not as much water flows over the falls. And actually at night, the falls are kind of shut down a little bit. So the water is turned on during the day when people are there. So there's more water, you can see more water, it's more exciting. And then at night, more water is diverted to the power projects. So the water then, so the rate of erosion has decreased significantly. So there's some other interesting things about Niagara Falls. So, so one of the sort of really important events in Canadian history took place at Niagara Falls. And this is the Treaty of Niagara. So Treaty of Niagara, there were approximately something like 2,000 First Nation chiefs came and met with the British. This was in 1764. So in 1759, the British defeated the French. 1763, the Royal Proclamation was made by the British Crown, basically outlining sort of British jurisdiction, as well as recognizing the sovereignty and the nationhood of First Nations. And then in 1764, the British and the First Nations met at Niagara Falls. So 24, something like 24, approximately 24 different First Nations convened in Niagara Falls with the British, and they came from as far east as Nova Scotia, as far north as Hudson Bay, and as far west as the Mississippi. Although they also think that maybe Sioux and Lakota came from what's currently the Plains, and they negotiated a treaty. So that's the Treaty of Niagara, and it was like basically a foundational agreement in what was to become in the sort of the development of Canada, and it's formalized the nation-to-nation relationships between the Crown and First Nations based on peace, friendship, mutual respect, and all of these things are still in place today. And this is the Wampum Belt that was given at that treaty, and it was a physical demonstration of that nation-to-nation relationship. You can see 1764. So that's another interesting thing about Niagara Falls. I'm just going to back out here a little bit. Hold on, I'm going to go back to this. A couple other things about Niagara Falls that are pretty interesting. So here's the boat. Here's the Griffin. This is the sailing ship that LaSalle built, just upstream of Niagara Falls. So launched in 1769. So this is the first sailing ship upstream of the falls, and it disappeared on its first voyage, carrying furs and people. So that's the sailing ship, and it's not a great map here, but here's the Niagara Falls. And right here is where this sailing ship was built in 1769. And right beside it, so this is actually the LaSalle Parkway in Niagara Falls, New York. And right beside it is the Love Canal. And the Love Canal is also another fascinating story. So I'm going to shift over to this image here. So this was a power plant built by Westinghouse and Tesla. So at the just before 1900, prior to 1900, people building industry had to build it right where the water was falling. So to produce electricity, they couldn't actually move electricity any distance. So they would build, once they had the ability to create electricity, they started building right by the falls. So Buffalo, New York was a really key part of early industrialized America, and industrialized all of the world. And it was, and then Tesla, who came up with alternating current and the ability to transmit current, basically worked with Westinghouse, and they built a power plant here. Before that, the Love Canal had been created. So somebody had this idea to sort of build a canal. They started to dig a canal with the idea that they were going to put industry along the canal that could be powered by the water flowing through the canal. And as soon as this power plant was built, and both with alternating current and the ability to transmit power, that Love Canal became redundant. So this big hole that had been dug sat empty for a long time, and as Buffalo developed, the Love Canal was filled in with industrial waste, and then eventually covered over and became and they put residential houses in it. And so in the 1950s, that's when people started getting sick from all the old all the industrial waste that had been buried in the canal that was never finished. And that canal was basically made redundant because of Tesla and this power plant at Niagara Falls. So over to the States. So year 2, we started off by paddling across the Niagara River to the States. We got there's a special app that you can get for landing remotely. And that's what this is. So you have to plug in the name of your vessel, the name of the captain, name of the crew members, and all this kind of stuff. Submit your passports, the whole process. So we had 2 vessels. We had white canoe and blue canoe, and I think I was the captain of one, and my son Kofi was the captain of the other. And they approved us, and then we paddled across the Niagara River. That's what it's like paddling across the Niagara River. It was a windy day, lots of chop. And this is the Buffalo, New York shore. All kinds of, I had mentioned that Buffalo was a real sort of point of industrialization, and there's all kinds of these old weird machines and all kind and factories and all sorts of stuff along the coast of the river. These are the bridges going across the Grand Island, so more really kind of cool bridges again. Now, once we hit, so Upper New York State is also the traditional territory of the 5 nations. So the Mohawk, the Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca. And here's their flag, which you may be familiar with. For people who are living in Southern Ontario, you've probably seen this flag. Represents the 5 nations, but there's 6 nations, and that's the 6th nation is the Tuscarora. Tuscarora are now have a community in New York State, which is located historically where the Wenro were, and the Wenro disappeared, I think, around the same time as the Ottawandaran, probably through a combination of war and disease. Tuscarora is a very interesting story about the Tuscarora. So the Tuscarora are the 6th of the 6 nations. So the Tuscarora have a community in northern New York State, but also at the 6 nations in Ontario. And Tuscarora are from further south in the U.S. near, I think they're in the Virginias area. And as settlers, as the tensions grew between settlers and First Nations in what's now the United States in that area, the Tuscarora were basically they were at war with the settlers, or basically a war developed, and the Tuscaroras were driven out and sort of escaped to the north, and were welcomed by the 5 nations, by the Haudenosaunee. And part of the thing that happened with the Tuscarora is they were first kind of pushed into a large swamp, and in that same kind of swamp complex, I think a number of the Tuscarora went different ways, but in that large swamp complex were also hiding out a number of escaped slaves. And so when the Tuscarora moved north to New York State, what became New York State, and into the Haudenosaunee territory, these escaped slaves went with them. And the Tuscarora became the Tuscarora in and all of the Haudenosaunee nations here became sort of a key part of the Underground Railway. And so the Tuscarora and other groups of the Six Nations basically assisted with the Underground Railway and the escape of slaves from the U.S. into Upper Canada, and that these are some of the routes you can see up, across the Niagara River, and then up also up into like up towards the Kingston area. And the Tuscarora were kind of a key group that really kind of facilitated that Underground Railway. So this is where we start into the Erie Canal. So it starts in Tonawanda, Buffalo. The Erie Canal goes all the way across through Rochester, to the Finger Lakes district of New York State, across to Albany, New York. And the geopolitics of this, I think, are pretty interesting. So here we have New York State, Philadelphia, and Boston. All three cities competing for sort of economic superiority, basically trading with Europe, trading with England, developing as cities on their own right. In 1824, the Erie Canal was connected. So from New York City, you've got the Hudson River going north towards Montreal, and then the Mohawk River heading west towards Lake Ontario. These blue bits are actual river. Orange bits are the canal that was built. So in 1824, when this connection was made, it basically connected the Atlantic Ocean and the port city of New York to the Great Lakes above Niagara Falls. So this connects. So you think about it this way: this connects New York City now into the Great Lakes, into the places that became Cleveland, Detroit, Chicago, Milwaukee, and all of the and basically enabled the development of all of those cities and New York itself. So within 10 years of the canal being connected, the property values in New York tripled. So the cost of transportation, this is before there were railways, cost of transportation dropped 95%. So they were able to move things through this canal so much more cheaply that it created a huge economic boom and basically made New York City on the map. It became the commercial, industrial, cultural center of the U.S. because of that connection of that canal. Here's what the canal looks like now. So as we paddled into Tonawanda, there was actually like a music festival happening beside us, which we were able to paddle through a music festival in our canoes, which was fun. This is kind of what the canal looks like. It's especially in the western part of it. Usually has these hardened edges. It's long, straight, like this, and along. Can't quite see it here. Maybe you can see, but there's a little. We hung soccer balls beside the canoes to basically as bumpers. Keep whenever we were parked. But beside the canal is a towpath, because the canals, they're barge canals, so they're not made for big ships. They're made for small barges, and this is how they would move the barges through. They basically would tow them by mule, horse, donkey, whatever, along these towpaths. They're now mostly used by people riding their bikes, walking, running, that sort of thing. You can see the old bricks where how the canal, the early towpath. Now, it's about 10 to, it is about 10 to 9. We are supposed to finish at 9. There's still a long way to go. So I'm thinking that we'll, like, to wrap up at 9, if we want to have time for questions, we could do them there. Unless, like, I don't know, Arlene or somebody, you want to maybe chime in here in terms of what do you think the best way to kind of go at this point would be?
Yeah, Jeremy, I was just thinking that possibly, I mean, everybody's still here as far as I can see, so it sounds like we're interested. I'm wondering if it's okay with you, if you just carry on with your presentation, and you know, if people need to drop off, then they can. But why don't we just roll with it? That's what I'm thinking.
Oh yeah, I'm cool with that. Okay, I'll just keep going then.
Yeah.
Okay. This is yeah. So the towpath also becomes a place to stop and camp. This is the town. This is the town of Lockport, and Lockport. And this is our first time going through a lock. So Lockport. So all along the canal, there's Lockport, Spencerport, Brockport, a whole series of ports. They're basically port towns because the canal was the major thoroughfare. It was the 401 of its time. It was the busiest transportation corridor on the North American continent in its time. These are the locks at Lockport, and sort of our first set of locks to go through. This actually, Lockport is where we drop down, we go down the escarpment. So it was a huge drop down the escarpment. You can see the height of this particular lock. It's a long way down. And this is where the Erie Canal drops from above to below the escarpment. Here's a painting that we found in a museum in Oswego, New York, that shows what it used to look like. So right now there are 3 locks, but at a time there were several more locks. And at every place where there were locks, basically towns grew up. The locks became places for people to stop. You know, there was food, there was industry. Everything that you needed basically showed up at all these different locks. So all the way along the river, wherever there's a lock, or at several of the locks, that basically little towns popped up, and this is one of them. So the canal is pretty straight. You can see it's kind of straight and kind of, yeah, quite straight here. This is where the canal was actually cut, and people dug the canal from here across to Rochester. And then you see here, it kind of gets all wiggly. This is where sections of the canal were actually integrated into the old river. So this is the Seneca River here, and this is the Oswego River here. Here you can see it's wiggly again. That's the Mohawk River here. It's straight where it was cut. This is, I just want to show this because it's kind of interesting. This is when the glaciers receded from this area 10,000 years ago. As they receded, this stretch through here was actually a glacial spillway. So as the glaciers receded, they actually blocked the exit of the water in the St. Lawrence River. So the St. Lawrence River was blocked. And so the water had to go somewhere. So it flowed out through here and ultimately out towards New York City. And so that current river and canal system is built on that old glacial spillway. This is going through Rochester, straight and narrow. Here's the Rochester Cut. Rochester, lots of highways and exhaust from highways as you go through it. As you can see, that's Leslie paddling through Rochester. As you go further east, you start to hit the rivers, and this is the Seneca River. So this is what the canal looks like. It's still the same depth. It's dredged and kept at 12 feet deep. It's for barges, remember, not for boats. And it's a lot wilder. And there's more nature, well, a little bit as you go into the river. So you can see all the turtles here. Stretches of the canal are really kind of industrial and kind of hard. Other stretches of it are really quite beautiful. So you see we saw lots of herons. This is a juvenile bald eagle that landed in this tree. I guess people said that it's like its parents were trying to kick it out, or its mother or something was trying to kick it out of the nest, and eventually it flew, and then it crashed into the tree, and it somehow hurt its wing or something, and it was just sitting on this branch as we paddled by, just crowing and squawking. This is what you call ecological restoration, where you build a structure at the side of the river that eventually, or side of the canal in this case, it becomes animal habitat. The water quality in the canal, like you can't swim in the canal. We swam in the Grand River, we swam in Lake Erie, swam in Lake Ontario, but the canal, definitely no swimming in the canal. Here's what the water looks like. It's pretty green. There's big stretches where they're having problems with an invasive species, and the other end of the canal, they spray the canal for this particular vegetation. There's lots of industry right along the canal. So as I mentioned, this was huge industrial corridor. So in the 1800s, in upper New York State, 90% of the people lived within 1 day's travel to the canal. So everybody lived close, either along the canal or within access to the canal, so that they could ship and move goods up to the canal, and then from the canal out to the cities, whether it was towards New York City, or whether towards the Great Lakes and Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland. This upper New York State was a huge agricultural area, and lots of fruit, kind of like the Niagara Escarpment in Guelph. Lots of fruit farms and other farms that could then move their goods by the canal. Another sort of challenge for water quality is the cows coming up to the edge. Here's the motorized barges. Again, you can see the towpath not being used in this case anymore, but big barges going up and down. They actually widened the canal 2 times. So they built it, and then they widened it twice because they couldn't get traffic through it fast enough. Interesting little place we found in this town of Lyons. It was the peppermint capital of the world. So they grew peppermint. They made peppermint extract in a big factory, and they shipped it all over the world from the Erie Canal. You can see these old buildings. Like it had a time of real grandeur, the canal and the areas along the canal. A lot of these are like cafes and whatnot. And a lot of people kind of travel the canal by houseboat. Many more people travel the footpath than travel the canal by boat. And we were the only people on canoes that we saw in canoes or kayaks traveling. Not too many people going through by canoe. Here's what it looked like in its heyday. This is the same town. This is in Spencerport, another port town on the canal. This is what it looked like in its heyday in the 1800s. Here's what it looks like now. There's not really much going on in a lot of these little canal ports anymore. Some of the ports are really quite beautiful. This is a place called Phoenix, and you can see all the boats lined up here. This is on the Oswego Canal or the Oswego River. This is a beautiful little port town that I would go back to. Really, really a sweet place. Other little ports. Some of the ports are trying to make themselves, add some attractions. So here they've painted the bridge abutment to show what it may have looked like a couple hundred years ago or 150 years ago. Here's how we park, and here's how everybody else parks. Water treatment plants, we saw some of those along the way. Again, challenge for the, great that they have them in place, but also a challenge for the water quality. These are some of the port towns. This is Lyons again, really dead downtown, beautiful little downtown, but it's like a place that time forgot. There are lift bridges, so bridges over the canal at all the port towns and numerous places. And these bridges all lift. They lift 21 feet, so you couldn't really get a sailboat through or a boat of any size. But these bridges lift for barges. Those barges are kind of low, flat barges, and these bridges lift. We didn't need to get them lifted, but otherwise they are. This is camping along the towpath. We camped all over the place. We got sort of more and more brazen with our camping, more and more comfortable just kind of camping in towns. And all along the canal, basically, there aren't very many good places to camp until you get to the towns. So we would get to the towns, we could get water, we could get food. A lot of the port towns are set up for cyclists and for houseboaters. So they have showers, they have bathrooms, they have running water, and so we basically go from port to port to camp. This is pulling into Oswego. So up here we're on the Oswego River, and down below is the Oswego Canal. This is the Oswego Canal up here, and down below you can see the Oswego River. So the two are braided together, but the one side is made for actually so that boats can still move through. This is what the locks look like. So there's a whole series of locks along the way. Here we are going through the locks. We usually just floated through them rather than holding on to the ropes outside because the ropes are pretty scungy. Some of the drops are pretty big. You can kind of tell. Some of you who know me know that I play the trumpet. So I had a trumpet with me, and I play in the locks because they're like big echo chambers and sounds beautiful playing in a lock. It's like playing in a church or a parking garage or some other place with great acoustics. This is what they look like. You're waiting for that. You're waiting for it to open, and then it's like open sesame, and then you can escape out the bottom. Very few boats going through when we were going through. The whole water system is controlled. They've got these water control systems. So they don't really do anything for water quality. Water quality isn't really a concern. Talked to Erie Canal workers, and they don't do anything for water quality. It's all really about managing the quantity and flow of water. And so in the river, in the winter, they put these gates down and shut off whole sections of the river. So big stretches of the canal, are fed. The eastern portion is fed by the Niagara River. The central part around Rochester is fed by the Genesee River, and the water quality in the Genesee River, like the Grand River, is improving. You may know Genesee beer. It's one of the That's why people know the name Genesee. Other stretches are fed by the Finger Lakes, and there's also there's some big wetlands and marshes along the canal that feed it as well. The development along the canal is really varied. You saw some industry earlier. This is on the Oswego part of the canal, and you can see some of the houses and pretty amazing places. Big mansions built along the canal in places. Some places aren't quite as nice. There's lots of this kind of thing where people have put in docks and stuff, and they just have kind of fallen apart. People have abandoned them. So there's lots of that kind of thing as well. There's some more modest kind of places that are also pretty nice. You can see how low their land is and all the willow trees, but really nice. Lots of people fishing in the canal, nobody really swimming in the canal, and nobody eating the fish from the canal. A couple sort of funny things that we came across along the way. These are fish flies. So one night we paddled through on the Grand River. We paddled through gazillions of fish flies, and we had to actually breathe through our teeth like that, because otherwise you'd get flies, like these fish flies that would just fly right into your mouth. Here's where the SLO Sheriff's Department is. So if you have an emergency, don't call these guys because it'll take them a while to get there. Here's somebody who their property was at the top of the hill, but they really wanted access to the water. So you can see all the trouble they went to get down, and then they've created quite a nice little spot along there for themselves. This was the museum in Phoenix, quirky little museum. I don't know what this little teddy bear is there for, but it was a funny little spot. We found a lot of places kind of looked like nobody was living in them. So there are lots of places where, especially as we got further east, where we saw where basically people put mannequins at their houses or their cottages. And so it looks kind of like, as you're going by, it kind of looks like somebody's there, but then the rate we're moving pretty slow in the canoe, so we can tell that person isn't moving. But I think if you're just zipping by on a motorboat or something, you wouldn't maybe know that there wasn't anybody there. So we found lots of these kind of mannequin places. Here's another one. Here's like a mannequin, looks like somebody's at a barbecue, like a barbecue mannequin. So I think it's basically so that nobody kind of goes into their place. This is us coming into Oswego. Oswego is a really beautiful small city on the south coast of Lake Ontario, basically due south of Kingston, Ontario. This is us coming into Oswego. Oswego is the largest port on the American side of Lake Ontario, and it has a lot of history. I'll just show you. I'll just zip along here a little bit so you can see. So this is a painting of Jesuits coming into Oswego 400 years ago, probably with Iroquois or Haudenosaunee guide. And here's us coming into the same part of the river 400 or 500 years later. You can see the landscape's changed a bit. Here's what Oswego used to look like. I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see. So, as I said, it was the biggest American and still is the biggest American port on Lake Ontario, and a lot of number of interesting things about Oswego. So after the American War of Independence or the American Revolution, the United Empire Loyalists, so people who basically fought on the side of the British, but were in the territory that then became America, became United States. Those people basically fled either back to England or north to Canada, and this was the biggest. So that was like 1784. So this was the biggest migration into what was then called Upper Canada at the time. So the population, dramatically increased in Upper Canada at that time, and some of the early treaties were made basically to accommodate United Empire Loyalists on the north shore of Lake Ontario, Port Hope, kind of area, and the north shore of Lake Erie. And Oswego was a real jumping off point for those United Empire Loyalists. Oswego was also the port that was a key kind of military port in the War of 1812. So American commander left Oswego and sailed to York, which is now Toronto, and burned it down. So so you may have heard about York being taken by the Americans in the War of 1812, and it was basically from a ship that left from this port and went over there and burned it down. And then the Canadians in response traveled down and burnt down the White House during the war as well. So it was like this, like Oswego was a really important military port during War of 1812. And then was a major place of jumping off for people escaping slavery, also to leaving from this port north into Canada. So at the time, New York State was a very progressive place, and a lot of the anti-slavery movement was based in New York State, and they actually had fair trade markets. So they had markets where you could buy non-slavery produced products, non-slavery grown vegetables. So much as we now have these kind of fair trade coffee and that kind of stuff, well, in the early and mid 1800s, they had fair trade agriculture and purchasing in New York State. Out onto Lake Ontario. So this is the final leg of our journey. Our final day on the water, basically. This was last year. We're heading east on the south coast of Lake Ontario, or the north shore of New York State, heading to the east. So we had a great time in Oswego. We were really welcomed there. We met some people, connected with a number of folks there who welcomed us with open arms, gave us a place to camp, really set us up, and a couple of people actually paddled with us out in our final day. So this is us paddling east. You can see this big nuclear power plant. Well, this is one of our friends paddling with us here. I don't know if you're online, Michael, but that's you. And paddling past a nuclear power plant. First time I've done that. This is Jennifer from Oswego Expeditions, another person who joined us that last day and who helped us out in Oswego. And then here we are. You can see our boat with you can see the the Moccasin. Up here in the bow, you can see the spray skirts that my mom sewed. And here we are paddling east. Yeah, the water was nice and flat when we left, but didn't stay that way for long. Here's a picture of the four of us together. And then our final day, we basically paddled to the southeast end of Lake Ontario, which is called Mexico Bay. And that's where we stopped this year, and that's where we're starting again. Hopefully, our plan was to start again this spring or this summer, but we're not going to be doing it. This is a sunrise around the kind of the next headland to the east, so this is where we would be heading next. It's 2020 and beyond. I don't know when we're going to be able to get back to this spot to start. So we may actually leave from here this year. We may start up in the St. Lawrence from Wolf Island or Kingston and head downstream from there. It's not sure. It's still to be determined. But at some point, we're putting our boats back in the water here and heading east. And that's where we got to. And if anybody has any questions or wants to follow up with anything, you're welcome to contact me by email or Facebook or Instagram. We post stuff along here when we're traveling. We post stuff, so it's a way that people can kind of see what we're doing as we go. And that is the end.
Hey, Jeremy, thank you. That was really interesting. And you probably haven't had time to follow the chat. There's a bunch of chats here, and I'll make sure to save them and so that you see them. That was a fabulous presentation. Thank you very much for that. I guess I'm gonna invite this next experiment. Well, first of all, let me check in with you. We are now getting close to 20 minutes after 9. So I'm wondering how much more time we should stay on board. Like we could take a couple questions maybe, but what do you think?
I'm good to go. It doesn't matter to me.
Okay. So the next
I can stay shorter as long as you or other people want to stay.
Okay. What if we just, because you've said you've made yourself available for some questions after through email, what if we stay on till 9:30, take a couple of questions and comments? In part, I'm saying that because this is also really experimental for me. There are right now 75 computers online, and I'm sure at each computer there are multiple people. So I'm not even sure how I'll manage this. I'm going to try. But if you, as a participant, have a question or a comment, there's a really easy way to do this. So at the bottom of your screen, if you're on a computer and joining us by a computer, on the bottom of your screen, there's something that says participants there. If you click on that, a little window comes up. And across the bottom of that window are a number of icons. There's one that says more, and it has 3 dots on a gray background. If you click on that, you can click on the hand and you can raise a hand. And I'm going to do what I can to see the hands. And if you have a hand showing up, I'm going to unmute you. Okay, here we go. I can see one is Shannon. So Shannon, go ahead.
Hello, Jeremy and team.
Hi, Shannon.
Oh, such a pleasure to be a minute part of your journey and bring you sandwiches, beer, and chocolate. The most important things, right?
Yeah. Cold beer on a hot day in the middle of nowhere. It was pretty great.
I have to say, it has been a super informative evening. What I have learned as an Ontarian and the history and our waterways, so informative, and my children and I tuned in, and it was very, very informative. So thank you for going to all that effort. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Shannon. My pleasure. totally enjoyed
It
it.
was great. It was great, and our families have been on similar journeys. So it's super reflective, and we can relate. So
Awesome. Thank you, Shannon. I'm going to pop you back on mute, and I'm going to scroll down to the next hand raised that I see, which is Jim Martin. So go ahead, Jim.
Can you hear me? Oops.
Yep.
Okay, good. I actually thought it was just a hand of approval when you first said that. So
Oh, okay.
that's giving a big thumbs up. But I do hope, Jeremy, you can get out again this year. Have you heard any prospects of whether that's going to be possible?
Well, I don't know. I don't think I don't know if we're going to get to the States or not. Like, I think if we went down there, and then we'd have to isolate if we came back, if we could even go down. I don't really know if New York State is the place to be these days.
Yeah.
You know, I think I have been like in contact with people in the Oswego area, and Oswego, like, it's New York City is the place that's been hardest hit, but Oswego and Oswego County hasn't been too hard hit either. So it may be possible. I think we're just kind of sort of see how things go.
Yeah, or maybe just go to Wolf Island and skip that little bit, or do you really want the continuous path?
Well, we could start at Wolf Island, skip that bit, and then come back and fill it in later. That's another option.
Right. Anyway, great presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
All right. I'm going to mute you, Jim. I do see you gave a thumbs up as well, so apology. I'm just scrolling quickly to see if the next hand that's up is, I can't tell who this is. The name that's showing up says JSRIE.
Yeah, I'm Sue Reachin. I was just clapping for Jeremy. I don't have a question.
Oh.
I found it fascinating, and that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Sue. Okay, let me see. Oh, this is so interesting. I've never done it with this many. Okay, I think that we have some thumbs up and things like that, but I think that might wrap up our questions, Jeremy. So, yeah.
So maybe one thing, I'll just put it out there. You know, I also welcome if there's people out there who want to come, who want to like join for an hour or for a day or a week down the, you know, somewhere down the path, down the water, then, you know, reach out to me, let me know, because you know, I always like having people come. So I'm just putting that out there.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeremy. Okay, well, Hardy, thanks for taking time out of your life to join us this evening. And I'm going to invite everyone to check out some of the rest of the 2Rivers Festival events that we've got going on. You can just go to 2riversfestival.org. There's lots of really interesting things. And of course, like, stay tuned to Jeremy's future adventures. And with that, I'm going to bid everyone adieu. So make your way out. I'm going to make sure that I save this as a recording to share with all of you and with those who couldn't make it on tonight. But we had a hearty crew. So thanks everybody for coming, and thanks Jeremy, and thanks Nature Guelph for hosting this.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Arlene. Thanks, Nature Guelph.
Okay. Bye-bye.
I'm going to stay here and read the chat. Is it possible to leave it open, Arlene?
Yeah, I can leave it open for sure. And I'm just finding a way to save it to my desktop too. So,
Okay.
But I'm not sure if I can do that. So go ahead and read it and I won't close off.
Okay, I'm curious.
Nice, Dad.
Who's that?
What do you mean with that?
That was Nigel.
Oh, is that Nigel?
Next time I want to hear more about our camping.
That's funny. I can't tell your voice, Ned.
Yeah, Jeremy, I'm not figuring out a way to save this, so I'm glad that you're taking a moment to read it right now.
Okay.
I'm trying, but I can't see it. So save chat.
Yeah, I'm reading the chat here. Did you read the chat already? Paul Clark. Oh yeah, John. Cool. Awesome. Is there any way to know who attended?
Yes, I can share with you the whole RSVP list as well afterwards.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, like I say, there were 240 RSVPs, and there were at one point there was 88 computers or phones connected to this, and that's just huge. That's a really, it's a very that's our most well attended event for sure.
Hey, Jeremy, Farley here.
Hey,
Hi,
Farley.
Hi.
what a great, it was awesome. I rushed home because I didn't want to miss it. And what a fabulous, I love the history pieces. And I especially, I really like the Erie Canal section because the summer, I brought a boat up from New York City last summer, and we had some engine trouble, but my whole reason was to actually get to go through the historical Erie Canal, which we never did get to do. So thank you for presenting the Erie Canal that I don't know if I'll ever get to at some point, but anyway.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, thanks, John.
Yes, fantastic. Well, what a pile of perseverance. I don't know if I could have done that. So I'd look for, where's your plan from there, from Mexico Bay? Are you, where are you planning to go?
Well, if we could, I'd like to make it to the Quebec border. That would be, that would be awesome. If I could make it to Quebec border, I'd love to do that.
So from Mexico Bay into what river?
Mexico Bay. So up the Mexico Bay, up to the St. Lawrence River.
Oh yeah, okay, right. Oh, yeah. Kingston, correct.
Yeah,
Kingston.
It's basically Kingston. Yeah.
All right. Wow, that's fantastic. Yes, yeah. I've kayaked the St. Lawrence out, Gaspé way, and it's some pretty big water out there. Because yeah. I was looking at your pathways, the proposed one, and then like the green one that would take you down, I guess through I can't remember what the map was looking at, but you're kind of cutting off the whole peninsula there.
Yeah, it could be a little, but then like I've spent a little bit of time along the St. John River, and it's so many dams. So
oh yeah, okay.
It becomes like another, like so many dam portages. Like anyway, that's one thing I'm thinking about.
Yeah, well, I mean, the St. Lawrence out that way. I mean, the history again, and the people, and the food, and there's so much awesome. And once you get beyond the Gaspé there, out on the peninsula, right in the Atlantic, then I guess the next leg of your trip is to like paddle right to the UK, right?
Well, I've been thinking that basically I would like load my boats into a container, ship them over, and I really like to do the Douro River from the middle of Spain out through Portugal to the Atlantic that way.
Wow, that's kind of interesting. That's almost like doing the Camino.
Yeah. Yeah, the canoeing version of the Camino.